Hi and welcome. This is Michigan's AutoTalk Podcast, and this is episode 77. Every episode of Michigan's AutoTalk Podcast is all about celebrating the automobile and everything automotive. We're also about helping and supporting you, car and truck owners across our great state of Michigan, birthplace of everything automotive. I'm producer Phil Tower, along with the host of the program.
I'm Al Schwinkendorf.
John Puhek.
And John Puhek. They're both here. And are you guys hearing me okay?
Yes, excellent.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, we're all here. We've got some new equipment, old problems, but welcome to episode. Yeah, just what else is new? We do these for our listeners, and we have some loyal listeners. We appreciate you as we are, now 2 years into this podcast, 2 years plus. We do this remotely with internet setup, and we're still trying to work out some bugs. It's a lot easier when we're sitting down all together in one space. And well, it's a lot easier said than done. This episode, Al has been jonesing to talk about the Chevrolet brothers. I had no idea there were more than one Chevrolet brother. So you're going to enlighten us, Al Schwinkendorf?
Yeah, I was blown away by this because I'm not a Chevy guy, but their story is unbelievable. The headline basically is that in 1920, Gaston Chevrolet died in a race car accident in Los Angeles. And he was the first of the three famous brothers to suffer a tragic end. So the story is that Gaston was the middle one. He was the kid brother of Louis, and he was the co-founder of Chevrolet Motor Company, which later got bought out by General Motors. And, when the Chevy name came big, the Chevy brothers really had nothing to do with it. They were born in Switzerland, moved to, their family left Switzerland. They moved to Canada, or to France, actually. Which you'd think the Chevrolets came from. And then the family left and moved to Canada in 1900. Arthur and Gaston, the brothers of Arthur, followed, and they went to work in Canada for Arthur as mechanics and race car drivers because he was a race car guy. That's what he did. They weren't building cars at this point in time. Mm-hmm. Arthur raced in the first Indy 500 in 1911, and then again in 16. He didn't finish either one. Louis ran it like 4 times. He finished 7th in 19, but he dropped out halfway on all the other ones. And they got together, the three of them, and said, we're not doing very good here. We got to fix this up. So they founded a race car design company in 1916 called Frontiac Motor Company, which is hilarious to me because Frontiac took the then Model T 4-cylinder Ford, and it basically put an overhead valve set up in the engine. And they went racing much like the Novies and stuff did later. But Chevrolet made their money modifying Fords. So that's always been something I can stick in Puhek's face.
Chuckle.
Yeah. Yeah, they went on and everything was cool until after the First World War, where, of course, they produced parts for the war effort. And they got back into racing and their stuff was dated. At one point in time, one of the brothers, I think it was 1920, actually won the Indy 500. There was a company called the Monroe Motor Company. They asked Louis to come run their racing team. So his brothers moved with them. They went to Indy and they started building race cars, and that's all that they did. They did okay. In 1920, with the adaptation of their engine and the Monroe chassis, Gaston actually won the Indy with a record speed of 86 miles an hour. This is 1920, where your road car would go, what, John? 32 miles an hour?
If that, I can remember it was that old Nash Super 6. We took that thing out on Cascade and
went 18.
I drove that thing. Yeah, I went like 20, if that, and I'm like, this thing's gonna fall apart. I couldn't even imagine breaking those speeds.
If you can picture, exactly, if you can picture the frame, leaf springs on all 4 corners, bicycle tires basically, and not as heavy as a Harley's motorcycle spoke wheel is today, wooden floor, and they're averaging 86 miles an hour. And I mean, the Indy 500 back then took like 6-8 hours. You know, it was unbelievable. They weren't doing 200; they were doing 80 for Christ's sakes, which was very, very. I mean, it was awesome. These guys were daredevils
at the time, yeah.
And this is at the time where you had a mechanic riding with you. because Indy's a 2.5 mile track. And if you're on the backstretch and you have a flat tire, they changed the tire. They didn't go to the pits. They pulled over and they changed it. They had an oil can to lube the overhead. Yeah, exactly. It was just nuts. So they had a good run there. The Chevrolet Monroe thing turned out really well. And they went to the, after the Indy 500, they went out to the West Coast and they had these things called board tracks, which are actually banked wooden tracks that they raced motorcycles at the time and cars on, and they were extremely dangerous. People got killed all the time. And like in LA, millions of people would come out. It's like watching big time wrestling because you're going to go out and see somebody get killed, right? So they go out there and Gaston's going on like lap 146, and they were outrageous back then. They ran way more miles than they really should have. And he had a crash. He was trying to pass a guy named Joe Thomas, and he struck a guy named Eddie O'Donnell's car on the outside. O'Donnell's car went down the track. These are super, super steep banks. The cars barely went fast enough to stick to him. And Chevrolet went up, hit the fence, and came down and fell on top of O'Donnell's car. So the crash killed Chevrolet. It killed O'Donnell. It killed a guy named Lyle Joles, who was O'Donnell's riding mechanic. And Gaston's mechanic suffered serious injuries. He got kicked out of the car. And the crazy thing about it is when the race was over, it was the final race of the year, Gaston Chevrolet won the national championship posthumously because he was killed halfway through this race. So he won the trophy, but he never got to see it. And the story goes on. He was 28 years old at the time, remember? And at this point in time, they've blown all the money selling Chevrolet to General Motors, which was nothing at the time, pissed it away on race cars. So, they're at this point in time, they're just poor race car guys, even though their name lived on. His older brother, Louis, died penniless at age 62 in 1941. He never did do much more. And Arthur committed suicide because he was going down the same path on his 62nd birthday in 1946. They're all buried in Indianapolis, and, you hear Chevrolet, and I've always known about the Chevrolet brothers and thought it was a big deal. I mean, if you go to the east side of Detroit and you tour like the Dodge Mansion and you know about Henry Ford and all these rich, prestigious people and all this stuff, these guys were just car junkies who race cars and killed themselves, basically. It's crazy. That's the Chevrolet brothers.
The nitty-gritty guys.
Yep.
And I never knew they were from Switzerland.
Well, they were born in Switzerland. It's a French name. I guess the grandparents and this and that came over, but their dad was a watchmaker. And in the center of the watchmaking activity in Switzerland, and he wanted them to do that. And they looked at springs and gears and stuff like that, and then they smelled gasoline and go, "Oh, we're going to be gearheads. Sorry, Dad." And they went from there.
In case
Crazy
of fun
stuff.
trivia, it's not too far away from us, guys. The gravesite of all the Chevrolet brothers, including a gravestone for Arthur, can be viewed. I'm looking at a photo of them at Holy Cross and St. Joseph Cemetery in Indianapolis. It's about a 5-hour car ride. There's a little bit of a plaque if you want to go down and see them. And yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Gaston Chevrolet, he's got a real big stone here. And it says, born October 4, 1892. That's my oldest son's birthday, just a couple of days ago for when we're recording this.
But not 1892.
Died November 25th, 1920. 28 years old. Yeah. 28 years old. That's amazing.
Well,
it is. And the whole saga is just crazy, but they got into GM early. And the people who had the money and the brains that ran GM used his brothers. They elevated their names so they could get their technology, because the Frontiac engine at its time was really something. I mean, when a Model T put out whatever it did, I'm just guessing here, 18, 20 horsepower or something like that. They were like 45 or 50. So it was insane. And they were geniuses, but they didn't live too long. I've been to that. I have relatives in that same cemetery, and I've seen that. their gravestones. It's crazy.
Yeah, in Indianapolis.
There's a really
go ahead, John.
There's a really cool document series on the History Channel, the Cars That Made America.
That's awesome.
If you get a chance, I definitely would try to watch it, because it starts out and it goes from just the very humble beginnings of Ford and Chevy, and then the Dodge brothers come in and all this stuff, and how everybody is intertwined and mixing around. And it was just so, I mean, it's hard to explain, but like I said earlier, driving that old 26 Nash down the road, that thing going, it was like, I mean, the steering wheel is this ginormous thing, and I'm driving. It's like, oh, okay, hold it together, and everything's mechanical brakes, and I'm like, oh, okay, we're going. And people are like ripping past me in Audi A8s or whatever, and then I pull off to the side of the road. I'm like, I feel like I just faced death.
He came in and
I was going 15 miles an hour.
You could see his pulse in his fingers. Now you got to remember that Nashes were the father of the AMC, right? So they're a lowly car to be. It's a Pacer, it's a Gremlin, whatever. This car was like, I don't know, 22, 21. It wouldn't be a car you'd race at Indy, but it would be a car you'd race at like a local short track. And it's the frame of a Nash. And it's got a Nash engine in it, and it's got this little flimsy sheet metal body all around it. And the thing came in with the engine stuck, and we had to put a head gasket on it and have one custom made and all this kind of stuff and put it together. And when the owner got it, who has raced all the major road racing tracks in America, drove it home the 3.5 miles, and he goes, I have never felt 20 miles an hour so fast in my life. It's like when you're a kid on your first fast go-kart and your butt's 2 inches off the ground and you're going 40, and you go, holy smokes, I just broke the world speed record.
Interesting thing on the Chevrolet brothers, Al, something you said, and I don't think a lot of our listeners knew. I didn't know, and I like to pride myself as knowing a decent amount about cars. The Chevrolet name was not made during the time the Chevrolet brothers started the company. It didn't really become an iconic name until GM took over the nameplate. And really, correct. I mean, it is a pop culture, where there's songs written, about it. Of course, baseball, apple pie, and Chevrolet, and all that, just the great things. And of course, the classic ad campaigns. But I did not know that it didn't become successful until GM took over. And the question I have is, I just Googled this. The best-selling Chevy of all time, just in terms of numbers, is the Impala. In fact, in 1965, it set a record, at least for modern 1960 sales, selling like 1,047,000 models. That's a lot of cars. Guys, that's 50 years ago nearly. 47 years ago. 57 years ago.
The 64 Impala is what everybody wants to start out. That's the classic lowrider on the West Coast and down south. And they did make that many of them, which is crazy. And that's all, 45 years after all the Chevrolet brothers are gone.
Yeah. Now, was part of that because of the cop shops picking up the contract for that, or was that after?
but still, they were just when the small block came out, the 283 in 55, they were it just revolutionized everything, and it was quite a change. And for anybody out there who are art fans, I'm not a real art fan, but I like what's called lowbrow art, because I'm like, if I was 30 years older, I'd be a major hippie. You know what lowbrow art is?
Yeah.
It's kind of tasteless, but it's cool.
What are you talking about?
Well,
now?
you gotta Google lowbrow art. There's a guy named Robert Williams. In the story of Gaston Chevrolet, he made a painting that's very, very famous. It's in some big art museum in LA called Death on the Boards. And it's kind of like a cartoony type thing, kind of like something that Ed Roth would do. But it was all about the tragic end of Gaston Chevrolet. And if you know what lowbrow art is, go check that out. If you're not, don't waste your time, because you might be disgusted or something like that. But it's that's how big the story is. And it just blows my mind that Chevrolet to this day, GM's down to what? Chevy, Cadillac, GMC. What else they got? Pontiac's gone. Oldsmobile's gone.
Pontiac's gone. Old's gone.
Buick. We got Buick, which are Daewoo's. They're Korean cars
right,
nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I would have to say that probably the main earner for General Motors in 2022 is Chevrolet. And those boys had so little input, sold out, and they brought that name. 2022, that's 102 years since he died, right? He died in 1920.
Here's another fun fact about Chevy in terms of all-time selling cars. The 1936 Chevrolet Suburban Carryall car is recognized by most automotive historians as the first ever sport utility vehicle ever manufactured. It was originally made for the National Guard and Civilian Conservation Corps. It had exterior panels. It was an 8-passenger car. It had the old 3.4-liter stove bolt 6 that made 79 horsepower. Yep. And here's the real cool fun fact about the 1936 Suburban. Since it's still made today, Suburban, the Chevrolet Suburban guys, holds the distinction of being the longest continuously active automotive nameplate in the whole automotive world. It's the longest continuously built. So, if you think about that, that's going on 86 years, which is pretty significant. Right. And it'd probably be here for another 14 years, the way that vehicle sells, even with gas now. I just saw gas this afternoon at $4.49 a gallon. It's creeping back up, guys.
2 days ago, it was $4.13. And I'm driving home tonight. It says 10 miles to empty, and I get like 17. So I'm like, I need to buy gas now. And I pulled in, it's $4.49. Are you kidding me? Here's the thing about the Chevrolet thing. If you dig deep and read into this stuff, because I'm a nerd and I do, Chevy was easy because they didn't pay royalties and stuff to the rest of the Chevrolet family. They made their deal, they cut it, and it was done. Just like when we talked about Oldsmobile, he made his deal with GM and it was done. Screw you. He started RE Olds, so that didn't last as long, but he got, even after he was gone there, he got a paycheck every time something got sold with his name on it. They were, one conspiracy theory is that, Chevrolet was a cheap buy. They laughed when they bought the boys off for next to nothing, and they've rode it all these years without paying anything out. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's just such a great story. And
look at the other side. If you've got a Ford,
as I do,
there's right. So do I. But there's 10 million people in the Ford family out there that all get a check all the time, no matter what, even though they were 4 generations removed. And then that makes sense to me from a business standpoint.
Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying. All right, we're going to put the wraps.
It was also based in, all these doings and deals were done at a very, most people would consider a simpler time. And so I could only imagine.
Gosh, General Motors were gangsters.
That contract, exactly. Like I can only imagine that contract was like a page that said, "Hey, here's $20. We good?
Take it or I'll shoot you." Yeah, it was prohibition.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very, very well said. That is going to put the wraps on episode number 77, Michigan's AutoTalk Podcast. We appreciate you following us, liking us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Michigan's AutoTalk. We're also on Twitter. And, of course, you can visit Verberg's Automotive and see these guys in person and, drop a few bucks to have your car run down the road for the winter, which we're due for a Get Your Car Ready for the Winter episode as well,
yes, we are.
Which we'll work on soon. It's early October, and who knows when it'll be snowing again. We always look at it that way. Until next time, for Michigan's Auto Talk Podcast, I'm producer Phil Tower.
I'm Al Schwinkendorf.
I'm John Puhek. Thanks for listening.